Welcome to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast, where we obsess about sports, pop culture, and politics, but mostly sports. Here are your hosts, Randy and Steven.
Welcome to another edition of Excruciating Minutia Podcast. I'm Steven, and on this very somber day, I welcome Randy. We today mourn the death of the AAF, the Alliance of American Football. It's dead before we even knew it. 8 games into its first 10-game season, they shuttered their doors, never to be heard from again. I don't know about you, Randy, but I'm not exactly stunned that a league died. Another pro football upstart died, because that's what they all do.
I'm mourning the loss. Mourning the loss because the AAF meant so much to me in its time. I had so many great memories of Christian Hackenberg playing terrible quarterback, of Johnny Manziel signing, other things I think may have happened. And, you know, those are all going to leave lasting impacts on my sports life and memories. You know, there was Joe Namath waving his finger in the air as the Super Bowl champion Jets went off the field after that great upset. We saw some, great Joe Montana drives. We saw dominance by the Dallas teams. We saw the 85 Bears. We all these great football moments. And then, of course, I have to put the AAF right alongside of those great moments in football history, right?
You can't even keep a straight face.
Well, you don't know. You can't see me. You're not here anymore.
I could hear it in your voice.
8 games.
I know. It's awful.
I have food still in my refrigerator that's been around longer than the AAF. I mean, come on now. Really? You're right, though. These upstart football leagues, I mean, the USFL made it through a few seasons, 3. The XFL, if whatever that was, made it through just that one. The AAF couldn't even beat the XFL. Well, XFL version 1, since Vince McMahon wants to obviously reboot that and do that over again. What was it? The World Football League back in the 70s made it through a season and a half, I think it was. You're going to compete against the NFL. That's not going to work. Even if you're going to try to work with the NFL, which the AAF was apparently trying to do, that doesn't even necessarily work, because they wanted it to be a bit of a developmental league, except agents apparently didn't want their players and their clients playing in this league. I guess they didn't want them to take a chance of them getting hurt or injured. So some people in the AAF said that was going to be an issue, that they really needed those type of players in there to bring more fans, I guess, or more attention to the games or more importance to it. But in the end, it came down to money. And obviously a league folds when you can't write the checks and actually have money behind them to make them good. And that's what happened here.
It struck me as being strange. They had a really big first week. It was right after the Super Bowl. They had primetime games. There was some interest in it. They had some people that we recognized. I actually watched one of the games, or part of one of the games. It was fairly entertaining. To be honest with you, it wasn't as good as college football, but it was better than no football, I guess. But when you go 2 weeks into a season and you can't make payroll, then something was wrong with your original business plan. Like, you have to have enough money to get through that first year of payroll.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they couldn't write checks. They would have written checks that would have bounced 2 weeks into the season. So what they had to do is they had to go and find some emergency financing. And where they ended up getting it from was the Carolina Hurricanes of the National Hockey League. Their owner, Tom Dundon, offered to bring in a reported $250 million investment, up to $250 million. But in exchange, he was going to get a controlling share of the league. And obviously, they were in a position where it was either that or they had to close the league immediately. So the league founders, who are Charlie Ebersol and Bill Polian. So Charlie Ebersol, whose father was instrumental in getting the XFL going with Vince McMahon, and Bill Polian, who's a longtime, NFL executive, right? So the guys who know a little bit about, you would hope, about running a league, but apparently they didn't. But anyway, they gave Dundon full control of the league, which gave him the ability to pad the board of directors with all of his people. And it also gave him the ability to unilaterally shut the league down, which is what he did. And Deadspin yesterday reported that he really only wanted to take over the league so he could strip it for its gambling and technology intellectual property. He essentially spent about $70 million of his money for the salaries. I'm sure in the back of his mind, he was hoping that maybe the league would work out and, that it would get that relationship with the NFL, that they could be kind of their farm system, but that didn't work out. And he was able to take all that gambling and technology intellectual property, which they said was the part of the league that actually had value. I think I mentioned to you the other day, it seemed like it was a very Gordon Gekko type thing. Buy up a company and then break it into all its different parts and take the parts that you want, and everything else doesn't really matter.
I'm stunned by the fact that you said essentially they only had enough capital to get through 2 weeks of the season. That's astounding, because I've read books, and I'm sure you have as well, a great book that was put out a number of years ago called Loose Balls. And I remember telling you about it. That was about the ABA and its early years of existence.
It's a great book. One of my favorite sports books of all time. It had some of the best stories ever. It's like
exactly.
You can't even believe it actually happened.
Exactly. I've read books on the early days of the AFL, and you read stories about these leagues in their infancy and their growing pains. Some teams having trouble making payroll, and in the case of the ABA, teams that actually folded. But geez, it wasn't after like 2 games. That's ridiculous. 2 weeks and that's it. That's all the money they had. That to me is the equivalent of going to Vegas to a casino to gamble, and you bring $100 and you immediately head for the high limit tables. Well, that's not going to work. That's not going to last. I mean, what were they thinking? I'm kind of stunned by that. I mean, I wouldn't have expected deep enough pockets to say, well, we're going to go 3, 4, 5, 6 years of big losses, but 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, you got to have money for that. So I'm kind of stunned. 8 weeks is all you get. It looked like an opportunity to give some players, because the NFL doesn't have a farm system, like you mentioned. They used to have the NFL European League. Well, they do. It's college football. But correct. A true farm system they don't have. We've talked in the past about the NBA having a developmental league set up. We talked before, obviously, about Major League Baseball's extensive minor league system. The NFL really doesn't have that, but probably could use that. This would have been a good opportunity to maybe have something like that develop, but obviously that's not going to be the case. I had read something where they're like, well, maybe there'll be a second. There's not going to be a second year. There's not going to be a comeback from this. They're gone. It's over. And the guy that they brought in to help them apparently was the wrong guy if the intent was to keep the league going, as you pointed out. So a little bit shady there, perhaps, but when you own a major sports franchise and you have the money that this owner of the Hurricanes has, well, you didn't make that money by not being shrewd in some way as a businessman, right?
Well,
or shady.
It's shady. He made his millions. Basically, he started as a finance manager at a car dealership.
Wait, was it a used car dealership? Was he a used car salesman? No. That would be classic.
No, he's not a salesman. He's the financial manager. Okay, so that's the guy, after you buy the car, he's the guy that works out all the paperwork and the financing and all that. And to be honest with you, having worked in the car industry before, that is where the car dealerships make all their money. Selling the car is part of it. It's the financing of the car where they make all their money. So if you don't go in with financing already secured, and let's say they know they can get you a loan at 1.9%, if they sell you, and I use that in quotation marks, they sell you that loan at 5%, the bank who's going to buy the loan cuts them a check for the difference. So they're making money on the financing part. That's where they make their true money. So anyway, this guy realized very early on when he was working as a finance manager that that's where the money was. And so he started with this dealership. They started like self-financing and doing all this. And he parlayed that into a subprime loan company that all they did was for people who are high risk, who pay exorbitantly high interest rates on their car. These are people that if they don't have their car, they can't get to work and they're out of a job, right? So they will literally do everything to make sure they make the payments. He built up this huge company and then sold it off to Santander Bank, which after he sold it to them, that bank got into a huge amount of trouble because of their subprime loans and giving loans to people that didn't deserve them. And it was a multi-billion-dollar fiasco, but he got out of it with like $1 billion. And so that's where he made all his money. This is a guy who literally was working in a car dealership, and he now owns the Carolina Hurricanes and tanked the AAF.
Nice gig if you can get it.
Right? Yeah, exactly. You were talking about like you couldn't understand how they didn't have enough money to do payroll. Well, I'm just doing some basic math here, right? The claim is that Dundon ended up putting $70 million of his own money in, which was 7 weeks. So that means your payroll is somewhere around $10 million a week, right? So they paid the first week's pay. They paid $10 million. They apparently didn't have another $10 million to make the second week's payroll. You know what the payroll is going to be. It's not like, oh, we didn't expect the payroll to be that high. The salaries are set.
They have fixed salaries. Yeah.
They have fixed salaries. Everyone gets the same money. Everyone. Each team has a couple of positions where they can go above that fixed salary. You know, if they're bringing in somebody like, you know, a name like, you know, Christian Hackenberg or
Johnny Manziel, who
Johnny
ended up
Manziel
signing with him for briefly.
Right, exactly. For like a week or two, right? So there are a couple questions about this. Is will a rival league ever have any level of success? I pose that to you.
Well, define rival league. And I don't think the AAF was intended to necessarily be a rival league. I think it was intended from its onset to be a complementary league. If you're talking about a rival league, as in we're going to take on the NFL and want to compete against them as a successful entity, I think the answer is no. And I think the problem is we're already saturated with football. And this is the case with all sports. So this would be rival leagues pretty much in any sport. There was a time years and years and years ago, decades ago, when there was not saturation of major sports. You didn't have it on television. You didn't have all these cable outlets, all these local channels, all these ways where you could literally watch professional sports on a regular basis. Think back to the 1950s, the late 50s. We had 16 Major League Baseball teams, right? 8 in each league. The NFL had a limited number of teams. Hockey only had, 6 teams until the late 60s? The original 6?
Yep.
The NBA only had so many teams. There were markets that clearly could support major league teams. You had fans in these markets who couldn't see professional sports unless they traveled to one of these other markets that actually had a team. Major League Baseball added teams in the 60s when they expanded originally, their very first expansion, because there were threats that another rival league was going to spring up, because there were markets that are like, hey, we could support a major league team. We want Major League Baseball. So the American and National Leagues got ahead of that and said, we don't want another competitive league against us. And they expanded into some of those markets, and that kind of killed it. The NFL didn't do that. And that's one of the reasons the AFL was successful, because they found their way into markets that could definitely hold pro football and support it. Same thing with the NBA. There were markets that could support a basketball team that ended up getting them. And again, that's why the ABA was successful for as long as it was. The World Hockey Association ended up merging into the NHL. And again, we saw teams from there that are still around today. I think at this point we have so many teams. There's been so much expansion over the years. Where were these teams in the AAF? They were in Orlando. I mean, they were small markets, right? I mean,
San Antonio.
San Antonio that wants an NFL team, but I think Memphis was one, and Memphis has been perpetually the kings of we get the second, they couldn't even get in the AFL, but every other subsequent league that's come along since that's been a quote unquote competitor, they've always ended up with a franchise.
Here are your teams. There were 8 teams. There was an Eastern Conference and a Western Conference. And you're going to recognize some of these coaches, by the way, because they're names that we've heard before. In the East, you had the Atlanta Legends, the Birmingham Iron, the Memphis Express, who was coached by Mike Singletary, the Orlando Apollos, and we'll get back to them in a moment. They're coached by Steve Spurrier.
I thought you were going to say they were coached by Carl Weathers.
No,
I know Spurrier was the coach there.
In the Western Conference, you have the Arizona Hotshots, coached by Rick Neuheisel. You have the Salt Lake City Stallions, coached by Dennis Erickson. You have the San Antonio Commanders, coached by Mike Riley. And the San Diego Fleet, coached by Mike Martz. That's your 8 teams. So some of them are NFL teams and some of them are ex-NFL teams, or cities, not teams, cities.
Yeah. San Diego, they certainly can support an NFL team, and they probably should still have an NFL team. San Antonio, maybe. Memphis, they've tried. Birmingham, that's another one. Birmingham and Memphis. If you're going to start a competing league, you put a team in Birmingham and Memphis. It's like the rules. It's like you have to, because the USFL, they had a team in both of those. So I don't think there'll ever be a competing league. The NFL is too strong. It's too big. There are too many cities. There aren't too many NFL teams, because I think pretty much all the markets they have work. But what it boils down to is you're not going to find enough markets that'll make for a competing league. Now, could there be a developmental league? Absolutely. But again, it would require the NFL to maybe work with it the way the NBA has worked with the leagues that they've used as developmental leagues. And apparently that may not be happening. So, and you pose the question, does the NFL need a developmental league? Well, right now it's college football. I think it would help. I think it would help players develop. Does the NFL itself as an entity think they need one? My guess is no. My guess is the NFL leadership and ownership feels that there's no reason for them to put any money into anything as far as a developmental league, because like you pointed out, they have the college football system doing it for them. The XFL, I think they said, was going to try to start up again next year, and that's just not going to make it very long either. You might see 1 year, you might see 2 years, and then that's going to be that. So, but you know what? Someone's always going to try, right? Because there's a belief that there's not enough football out there. I think there is. There's plenty of football now. I don't think we need more football. Pro, college, high school, we have so much of it. There's not really a crying out need for put more football on my television. I need more football. So my own 2 cents with that.
I was laughing because you were saying that if you start a rival football league, you have to put teams in Birmingham and Memphis. You couldn't be any more correct. So the World Football League had the Birmingham Americans, which became the Birmingham Vulcans.
Was Spock their coach?
I don't know.
Leonard Nimoy, their announcer.
Exactly. They also had the Memphis Southmen, which changed for the 75 season into the Memphis Grizzlies.
That sounds familiar, actually.
It does. All right. So let's move on to the USFL. And you had the Birmingham Stallions. And you had the Memphis Showboats.
With Reggie White on the Memphis Showboats. That's where he started his pro career. Hall of Famer.
Now let's go to the XFL, which only had 8 teams, but they had the Birmingham Thunderbolts and the Memphis Maniacs. So literally every upstart league that has come to be has put teams in both Birmingham and Memphis, and none of them have worked out.
It's the law. Got to put a team there.
It must be. One more thing on the developmental league. I will say this. The NFL is not interested in having some other outside entity creating a developmental league. They're not going to provide them with any help or assistance. They've already tried to do a developmental league. They did NFL Europe, right? That was basically NFL owned. And it was an off-season type of thing. It was expensive, and it didn't really provide the teams with what they needed for the huge investment. So they stopped doing it. It's all about money. And the NFL has come to the realization that, you know what? There already is a minor league system for football players. It's called the NCAA, and it doesn't cost them a freaking dime. And any other league that they develop is just going to compete with the NCAA, and they're not willing to. They're like, you know what? We're good at what we do. We're going to dominate. We're going to make sure that no one else is going to come in. This is our area, and that's it. I don't think a developmental league is ever going to take form again, and I'm 100% sure that this new iteration of the XFL is going to fail just like every other upstart league has done in the past.
And the end result will be somebody's going to lose a lot of money when it's all said and done. That's the end result of all these operations, right? Loss of money.
That's correct.
And nothing to show for it. But I feel bad for the players because, obviously, from what you said, the games were actually, pretty entertaining and there were some good things about it. I will say one thing I liked. There was one rule because they were doing some different rule things. And one of them wasn't the onside kick. Instead of having that, it was like you could do like a 4th and 12 from your own whatever yard line in place of an onside kick. And I actually thought that was a neat innovation. Maybe something the NFL could look at down the road. And again, these type of leagues would give rise to innovations. I believe the USFL made the 2-point conversion part of their initial thing. And the NFL resisted, but we always thought it was something the NFL should do. Eventually, the NFL came around and adapted that. Wasn't the 3-point shot an invention of the ABA?
Sure was.
And now it's a huge part of the game in basketball. So, sometimes these leagues do have lasting impacts, but there's not going to be anything from this AAF, from all of these 8 weeks we got from the AAF. Like I said, there might be milk in my fridge older than the AAF at this point. I'll have to check. Might be a little chunky.
Milk was a bad choice.
There was one development that they came up with that I thought had legs. And it was that they had what they called a sky ref, so that all replay stuff was done by a referee on premises up in the box, up in the press box, right? And they actually had a camera and a microphone on that referee. So you could hear them and see them and go through the thought process of how they came to the decision that they came to. I thought it was interesting. At least, you didn't have to agree with it, but you at least would see the thought process that went into why they either upheld or overturned a replay call.
That would make sense, but, it's replay. The NFL won't get that right. When do they ever do, right?
You're probably right. You're probably
all right.
right.
Well, let's move on from the AAF because, again, I think we've almost spent as much time talking about the AAF as it actually existed. So you told off their bell, and that's the end of that. So let's move on to leagues that have been around slightly longer than the AAF, and we'll talk about Major League Baseball, right?
Yes.
An early first week with, the first week of baseball is always a little goofy. Strange things happen, right? It's early. That's what we always say. It's early. We just got into April. So there's a lot of season to go, but we've already seen a lot of injuries. We've seen some teams that we predicted to do well that aren't starting off particularly good. We've seen a rash of contract extensions. So where do we want to start? I guess maybe, you know what? Let's start with, I did something today for the first time. I'm an adult male, and I actually tweeted for the first time today. And it involved one of the teams that's off to a bad start. So are you proud of me? I've joined the era of Twitter. I can't believe. I always said I never would. And yet now I'm on Twitter with, again, for anyone who wants to check us out, we have our own Twitter feed, correct?
Yes, it's at Excruciating Pod.
At Excruciating Pod. There you go. So check us out on Twitter if you haven't already. And I'm really proud. My first tweet ever essentially compared Yankees manager Aaron Boone to a monkey flinging his own feces. when making up the lineup card. My family would be proud. I feel like that encompasses Twitter. As you said, that's literally what Twitter is. And I'm like, well, there you go. I don't know if the fact I feel like I'll fit right in is going to be a good thing or a bad thing. But we could talk about some of these teams not off to good starts, and some of them are related to injuries. I mean, look at the Yankees. The Yankees are, as of our taping today, we're taping this on a Thursday, and the Yankees are going to win or have already won their game today. They already won. They beat Baltimore 8-4. But they got off to a kind of a slow start, and they've just been crippled by injuries here early on. I mean, they've had Miguel Andujar, the runner-up for Rookie of the Year last year, has, a torn labrum in his shoulder. May need surgery. If he does, he's out for the year. Giancarlo Stanton, torn biceps. He's going to be out for a month. Troy Tulowitzki, I think injured, like dressing in the locker room, I think is how he got hurt. Who knows? He's perpetually, again, you can't spell Tulowitzki without IL somewhere's in the name, right? He's hurt. Aaron Hicks was already injured to start the year. Severino already injured to start the year. When we did our picks on teams and where they would finish and win totals, I picked the Yankees to be an under. Feeling pretty good about that, the way their season is starting. As a Red Sox fan, I'm sure you're feeling pretty good about that.
I am. I'm not feeling good about the Red Sox terrible start, and it looks like they're going to lose again today. I think last night they won and broke a 4-game losing streak. They had 0 4-game losing streaks last year. So not good to be starting off the season, the first week of the season, with a 4-game losing streak. But yeah, the Yankees are just decimated with injuries, whether it's Giancarlo Stanton or, their pitching staff, even with Betances and Severino and, even CC Sabathia still injured, right? I think I just saw that with Tulowitzki going on the DL, that was 11 players on the Major League DL for the Yankees. 11.
That's a lineup plus, basically.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot of guys. I think the bigger problem with their injuries is, how long they're going to linger. I mean, I think the big one there would be Andujar, because as good as he was last year and with the idea that he was going to develop and be even better this year, if they lose him for the whole season, that puts a nice big dent in their offense. And we talked about the Yankees being a team that was going to have to outscore other teams, we thought, to win games. Like, they have a good bullpen, but their starting pitching is definitely suspect. These are injuries on the offensive side. And that lineup today, to go back to my Aaron Boone flinging poo to make his lineup comment that I tweeted about, I looked up and there was Luke Voit, who did end up homering in that game. So that was his second home run, but it was literally his first offensive production since opening day. He was hitting at one point during the game. His average had dropped to 135. Brett Gardner hitting at the top of the lineup, who's struggled to start the year. Gleyber Torres had a big day. He's off to a really good start. And DJ LeMahieu, it's a good thing they picked him up, because I think he's going to be very, very important for them. He should be hitting at the top of the lineup. For whatever reason, Boone has him hitting in the bottom half of the lineup, which doesn't make much sense for a guy who's a good on-base guy like LeMahieu. So maybe Boone will change that around at some point, or maybe the monkey will keep hitting the wrong spots when he makes the lineup. But getting LeMahieu may be like at the time when they signed him, it's like, well, that's depth in the infield. He may be a regular player for them for a significant amount of time, considering all the injuries they've had at this point. So if I was a Yankee fan, I wouldn't push the panic button yet. Again, it is April, and so much can change over the course of the year, right? You pointed out the 98 Yankees started the season 1-4 on a West Coast trip. That team won 114 games. The Red Sox, they started the season slow. Their pitching's been bad. Chris Sale has looked. Are you worried about Sale at this point?
I'm not yet. One of the things that the Red Sox did, and it was a conscious decision that they made way back right after the World Series, was that they put a lot of mileage on some of those arms, and they basically slow played all of their pitchers in spring training. So the reason that spring training is 6 weeks long has nothing to do with the hitters. The hitters don't need 6 weeks, but pitchers need 6 weeks to get ready. And the Boston pitchers really only had about 2 weeks prior to the season of pitching. They did not even pitch in a game until like the 15th of March. So they're kind of like 3 weeks behind everybody. Their idea was they're not really concerned about what happens in April. They want to be ready for September and October. And they want to take care of the arms. And that's what they did. So it's not really that surprising that the Yankees gave up. I think in their first 6 games, they gave up 42 runs. And most of that was
the Red Sox.
Yeah,
Red Sox. You said the Yankees. That's wishful thinking on your part. But
yeah, they gave up 42 runs. So seven runs a game. And that really was the starting pitching, because the bullpen, which we said was kind of a question mark, has actually been pretty good this beginning of the season. The problem is by the time they get to the bullpen, they're already well behind in the game. So
it is early. The other thing is, again, who's really going to challenge them in the division? Maybe Tampa. That's who you suggested. I was not as high on Tampa. When we made our picks, I actually had picked Tampa as a team I would take the under on. I'd like to note that I did see, at least through their first turn through the rotation, they did not use the dreaded opener idea in games that were started by their number 3 and 4, and I'm putting this in quotation marks, starters. They actually started those guys to start the game. Tyler Glasnow was one of them, had a really nice outing. Chirinos was the other one. Both of those guys pitched really well. If Tampa just doesn't muck things up and actually leaves those guys to start, and that's their 4-man rotation, and they'll figure out what to do with the 5th, yeah, maybe Tampa can give a run for a playoff spot. I still don't think they're going to be good enough to beat Boston and the Yankees. I think in the end, like I said, pushing the panic button in April for a team is never really what you need to do. I mean, we know there are really bad teams in baseball right now. I don't think those two are going to be 2 of them. The Cubs, however, they're off to a bad start. Their bullpen's been kind of shaky. They made 6 errors the other day in a game, so their defense has been a little bit shaky. I don't know with the Cubs. And Joe Madden is on the last year of his contract, and he did not get an extension. So I'm wondering if we're about ready to see some shift coming up in Chicago at some point here. I think there's definitely a lot of pressure on them to produce this year, or else I think Madden's going to be gone, and I don't know what that'll mean for the way the Cubs are structured right now. I mean, Epstein and company are not going to continue to watch the team underperform. I think we can agree on that. I mean, what's wrong with the Cubs at this point? I mean, are they just not as good a team as we thought they might be? Is that what it boils down to?
I believe that might be the case, yes. I did not pick the Cubs to make the playoffs. They were not one of my I didn't have them winning the
correct.
Central, and I didn't have them as one of the wild card teams. So none of this has surprised me. I know that they won a World Series I guess it's been 3 years now, right? 3 years ago, they won a World Series with Joe Madden. I really felt like they won that World Series in spite of Joe Madden, not because of him. Over the years, we've talked about the terrible managing of Mike Scioscia and how relieved you were that he was finally out of baseball this year. Well, Joe Madden is from the Mike Scioscia coaching tree. So he does a lot of things that just make no sense. I like Joe Madden a lot. There was one moment that kind of switched everything for me. It was when he started having his pitchers bat 8th. And I was like, you know what? You lost me.
That's out the Tony La Russa school.
Right. Unless your pitcher is Madison Bumgarner or Zach Greinke, or if you had Ohtani, for example, in a National League park, right? That's a dumb move. It's a terrible move. It's as dumb as batting your best on base guy 6th in the lineup when you've got a bunch of it's no different than the monkey poo situation. So I remember with the Cubs when they won that title, right? Everyone said, wow, they won this title like a year before they were really supposed to be ready, right? And it was going to be, well, they won this title early. They could win multiple titles with this team, right? Well, that's been 3 years. These guys, these young guys that were supposed to be getting better really haven't gotten better, or they've stayed about the same. And other players have aged and gotten worse, and they've made some really bad contract decisions.
You Darvish.
Jason Hayward. I mean, there's been a lot of them that have just been like, God, that's terrible. And I know that Theo Epstein gets a lot of credit for bringing a world championship to the Red Sox after so many years and being there with the Cubs, but his front office really has not impressed me much over the last 3 years. They should have been able to take that core of young talent and really turned it into something really good, and they just haven't.
And I think it's a combination of things. I think it's like you said, some of the young players have not taken bigger steps like maybe they thought they would. Their pitching, I think, is significantly worse than it was when they won their World Series, both from a starting pitching and a bullpen perspective. And that's a bad combination. And again, I'm of mixed emotions about Joe Maddon. I think he's a great players manager. I think he's outstanding at managing egos in the clubhouse, keeping a team happy, keeping everyone on the same page. He's fantastic with that. Some of his in-game decision-making, that's what I've always sometimes looked at with kind of a suspicious eye, and like you said, whether it's the pitcher batting eighth, or I don't know how many times last year you heard me complain, yep, the Cubs don't have their best lineup on the field. Why are you trying to put yourself behind the eight ball to try to win games? You're not playing your best players. And I understand you don't play everyone 162 games a year. I understand you want to keep everyone involved, but there's no reason why this guy should be in the lineup today or this guy should be in the lineup today. And he just seems to do that a lot more often than other managers do. And I thought last year it cost the Cubs literal games, and considering they ended up with such a heavy dose of games down the stretch, remember that? It was they were playing like literally every day because they had rainouts and things earlier in the year. And it's kind of like they already had those days off for players to rest and all that earlier in the season. And then Maddon still kept giving it to them. And then when it came down to the end of the year, the Cubs were battling Milwaukee, needed to win every game they could, and were playing every day and were exhausted and wiped out and ended up in that playoff. And that was that. Just like that, season over, right? 2 more wins and you don't have to worry about that. You're in a lengthy playoff series, and then it's a different story instead of a 1-game win or go home situation. I'd put that on Maddon's shoulders last year. You can get away with some of what he does and take the advantage of how good he is with his players when you have a talent advantage over other teams. But when you don't, as you said, the young guys don't develop, the pitching gets a little bit more suspect. Now, all of a sudden, they're not at a talent advantage over, let's say, a team like Milwaukee. And maybe that's going to show. And yeah, I picked the Cubs to be one of the wild cards, and I'm starting to second guess that one already myself. So, but you're right. You did not pick that. You were absolutely on with the they're not going to make the playoffs. And again, it's early. A lot can happen between now and then. More people can get hurt. You have a list of injuries here. It's just there's just been a whole lot of injuries into some really good players. We mentioned the Yankee guys. Justin Upton was at 8 to 12 weeks with a torn toe tendon. Say that 3 times fast. That kind of came out of nowhere. Scooter Gannett, 8 to 12 weeks in Cincinnati with the torn groin. I know that was particularly painful for you since you own him in our fantasy league.
Not as painful as it was for him.
Oh, it looked painful for him. He literally was standing in the outfield waiting for the cart to come get him and holding a groin, hopefully his own, right?
Yes.
Daniel Murphy in Colorado, broken finger, out 4 to 6 weeks. Trey Turner just broke his finger, out 4 to 6 weeks. And, the Nationals certainly can't afford to lose a guy like him. Steven Souza tore like every single ligament possible in that incident that he had. He's out for the year. Francisco Lindor, rehabbing on some terrible field down in some minor league park, sprained his ankle. He's out for at least a month. I mean, there have been injuries left and right here, and there always is early in the season some injuries. Does it feel like it's more than it normally is, or am I imagining this?
I feel like it is more than it normally is, and a lot of them are fairly significant, and they're weird. When was the last time you saw a torn groin with somebody out 8 to 12 weeks? You never see that. And Justin Upton, kind of banged his foot into the wall trying to chase down a fly ball, and he walked off the field on his own. And then, like, his toe's a little sore. He'll be out a couple of days. And the next thing you turn around, it's like, oh, he's out 8 to 12 weeks,
3 months, potentially.
Right. Andahar, who hurt himself like diving back into third base when he had overrun the base and he dove back and kind of jammed his shoulder. He stayed in the game and actually made a bunch of throws from third base over to first. His throws had plenty of power on it. Nothing was wrong. And then the next thing you know, it's like, oh, well, he's not in the lineup, right? It was at first it was like, oh, he's going to have a day off for sore shoulder. And then like 2 hours later, I was in the car driving. I had a 4-hour drive and I get on the phone with you and you're like, yeah, Andujar's out for maybe the year. He has a torn labrum.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah, I was the bearer of bad news on that one. Sorry.
Mentioned Corey Nebel in Milwaukee out for the year with a torn UCL.
Well, apparently he's been pitching with that for like multiple years and had made it through multiple years with something partially torn. But, it just got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore. And that's a lot of guys on the shelf early. So
from a fantasy perspective, not that I own him anywhere, but information like that might have been nice to know for people that were drafting and they're like, he's sore or whatever. And the next thing you know, I just dropped $20 on Corey Nebel and he's out for the year. It's like I basically just pissed that away.
Well, you got to keep that information away from your opponents because there's such a huge advantage when managers and general managers hide injuries from their, from other teams. Again, I want to point out when teams do this and teams hide information and all, what good does that do? It's different if we were in the playoffs. It'd be different if it was in October and he was injured and you weren't sure how badly. And the team doesn't want to let on how badly somebody might be hurt because maybe that does affect the way the other team approaches them. But this is April. We're in April. What does it matter? You have a whole season. It was like when a manager or whatever would go into the start of the year. I forgot what it was. And again, it might just be what he told the press, but I think it was your manager. It was Alex Cora. And they were asking him who Boston's closer was going to be. And his comment was he wasn't ready to name one yet. And the comment he made, which is probably not the reason. I think the real reason is because he doesn't know for sure who it's going to be. He's going to wait to see if someone runs with the job, right? But instead of saying that, his comment was, I think literally to the media, I don't want to tip my hand. And I think my reply to you was, what does it matter? It's one game. What does it matter tipping your hand? There is no tipping your hand. It's nonsense. Stop overthinking things. These managers, they all want to overthink everything. I've maintained that definitely in the NFL and definitely in Major League Baseball, I am convinced that some of these managers and these head coaches would rather lose games if they can blame it on their players or somebody else than win games if they don't get the credit for it. That it's all about being able to point and say, well, we won because look at the great move I made, or look at the great strategy I employed. Look at the out of the box thinking I did. So that way I get the credit and not the guys who are actually out there on the field. I maintain and I swear that that's the way some coaches and some managers think. And that's what leads to some of this nonsense that we see. But again, that's a pet peeve of mine. And over the course of the baseball season, we're going to probably hear me complain about this more than once. You know we will, right?
Yeah.
It'll be a running theme.
And I've made the comment to you, and it's something that we're not going to discuss here because it's like a whole episode on its own. I think your hatred of managers is probably a little misplaced because I believe that a lot of the managers that have been hired more recently, especially these no-name guys, and we'll get to them in a little bit, are hired because they don't want them making decisions. The general managers want to make the decisions for them. So they just want a puppet because if you're a general manager, you can't be the manager. So they just want a puppet in there to pull the strings, and they don't want to pay a manager these huge amounts of salary, the $6 or $7 million a year that somebody like Joe Torre was making. They'd much rather pay some guy, a stooge to sit in the dugout for, $1 million a year and basically just do what I tell you to do. And I think that is what is happening right now in baseball. It's why the Yankees got rid of Joe Girardi and put in Aaron Boone, because Joe Girardi did not agree with that, and he was not going to agree to work in a situation like that. But again, it's not something we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about it later because I would like to move on to some other stuff. We have a couple things that we have to hit on before we get out of here today. You mentioned that there was a rash of extensions that have happened in the last couple weeks, starting very quickly after the two big free agent signings of Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. All of a sudden, the next big thing was that Mike Trout was signing a 10-year extension? I think it was 12 years, $430 million. What it was a lot of freaking money.
And the guarantee he'll be wearing an Angels uniform probably the rest of his career, or at least almost the rest of his career, barring a trade. But yeah, he's not the only one. Give us that list, because everybody and their grandma seemed to have signed. In fact, I think Trout's grandma might have signed an extension while she was there or whatever. I mean, everyone and their grandma is signed an extension in the last 2 weeks. Well, give us a list here. And there's some young players. There's some veteran players on here.
Yep. I'm going to list off of this is actually MajorLeagueTradeRumors.com. They have a page called Extension Tracker. So Mike Trout got a 10-year, $360 million extension, and that was on top of his existing contract. So when his current contract that he's under ends, this would kick in. So if you looked at the full amount, I think it was closer to $430 million. Eloy Jimenez, who is an up-and-coming White Sox outfielder, when he signed the contract, had yet to even taken that bat in a major league game, if I'm not mistaken, signed a 6-year, $43 million extension, which basically bought out all his arbitration years. Blake Snell with a 4-year, $50 million extension. Chris Sale with a 5-year, $145 million extension. Paul Goldschmidt, who was just traded this offseason, and I think a lot of people were thinking that, St. Louis they trade for him and then he'll be a free agent. Nope. St. Louis re-signed him 5 years, $130 million. Justin Verlander signed a 2-year extension for $66 million. Kyle Hendricks for the Cubs, 4 years, $55 million. Here's a couple of big ones. You had Jacob deGrom, 4 years, $120 million. And then Xander Bogaerts from Boston, 6 years, $120 million. You had Ronald Acuna, 7 years, $100 million.
And there's a guy in Acuna who just got to the majors, right? And is getting this huge deal from Atlanta to buy out, I guess, arbitration and early free agency, right? I mean, as good as he is, that's a big contract. But we even had journeymen not journeymen, but utility guys are getting extensions here, right?
Well, German Marquez got a contract, a starter in Colorado, 4-year, $42 million. I mean, he is kind of their number one or number two starter. But you had a couple other guys who I wouldn't call them stars or anything close to it. Randall Grichuk from Toronto got a 4-year, $47 million contract extension. And the Cubs, David Bote,
utility guy.
Yeah, he's basically a guy that plays kind of all over the place and doesn't really have a regular job, signed a 5-year, $15 million contract. I guess that's, $3 million a year. It's really not that much. And a lot of these contracts have opt-outs. I mean, Bote has an opt-out after 2 years, as does Acuna, by the way.
Oh, okay. Did they need to sign Bote to that contract, though? I mean, was there a pressing need for the Cubs to say, we got to lock this guy down? That seems kind of strange. Some of these made a lot of sense. The White Sox with Jimenez, that I thought was a good move. Obviously, the Angels with Trout, that was a good move. Houston, Verlander loves it there, and they love having him there, and he's effective. I could see that. Same thing with the Mets and deGrom. A lot of these contracts, yeah, they make perfect sense for the teams. I find 2 things or 3 things I took out of this. Number one is there are a lot of Yankee fans out there who are probably apocalyptic right now, because there's a list of players here. And no offense to any Yankee fans that might be listening to this, but you've been around a lot of Yankee fans, and a good number of them seem to feel like it's their, God-given right that top players in Major League Baseball have to end up playing for the Yankees. And I'm sure plenty of them had envisioned Bryce Harper at some point ending up in a Yankee uniform over the last couple of years. Well, that didn't happen. And I'm sure they were thinking Mike Trout was going to end up in a Yankee uniform. Well, that's not happening. And there's a list of a lot of players on here that I'm sure they would have liked to have seen in Yankee uniforms. Maybe like a deGrom, right? Maybe like a Blake Snell. That won't be, because now they're tied up in these extensions. So, Yankee fans may be the most disappointed fans. watching all these extensions go through. Certainly not fans of a lot of the teams seeing their players get locked up. The second thing I noticed was I'm looking at the agency representing these players. I was actually stunned that one of them was actually a Boras client. That would be Bogaerts. But the rest of them were not Boras clients. But Bogaerts apparently was. And that surprised me a little bit because traditionally Boras players always go to free agency, don't they? As a rule of thumb. I mean, it's rare that you see Boras players that sign extensions, at least from my past remembrance of it. But yes, I like to see the extensions. I like the idea of players who play for a long time with a franchise and really get associated with a franchise. One of the bad things about free agency to me always was the fact that way back when you had teams and players would stay with these teams for the length of their career or much of it, and you really identified with it. And I think it made a bond between the fan and the team that much greater when you see the same guys year in and year out and you see them develop and you get attached to them, right? I think that really builds or helps to build the fan base and strengthen the fan base. It's one reason why there is no fan base in some place like Miami, where the players go as quickly as they become good and you get to know their name, they're shipped out to save a few pennies, right? I think this is good. And I think from a player standpoint, you're seeing these extensions for a couple of reasons. And I'll let you touch on the financial end of it. But we talked about before, I think a lot of these players have looked at it like Trout. And he said, yeah, could I get more money maybe in a free agent deal someplace else? Sure. But how much more am I going to get? I like it here. I like playing for the Angels. I like the organization. I like the owner. I like the people here. I like the fans. Whatever it is, he's comfortable there. And you can't put a price tag sometimes on that. Or you can, but when you're making, what did you say Trout's contract was? I mean, it's, hundreds of millions of dollars. What does it matter at that point, right? I mean, there's only so much money you can get. At some point, the happiness with the organization or the team or your situation, not uprooting your family and kids, all these things come into effect. And it's good, I think, from these players' standpoint for them to get some sense of security where they know this is where I'm going to be. This is the team I'm going to be on. And I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. I think you'd agree with that, right?
I would. A couple of the contracts I missed, by the way, I just realized, I'm like, I feel like there were more contracts than this. Alex Bregman, 5 years, $100 million. And I missed one of the really big ones. Nolan Arenado, 7 years, $234 million.
That's a guy the Yankees fans thought were going to be in a Yankee uniform. Sorry, guys. He's staying where he's at. But, Arenado's a perfect example. If you're Arenado, why would you want to leave? Colorado has been competitive. We talked about them. They've been in competition to win that division, to make the playoffs, to make a World Series run. And if you're Arenado, you've been with that organization your whole career. It's a bonanza for your hitting stats, right? You get to hit in Coors Field. If you're thinking long term and you're like, what do you want if you're a player? There should be three things that are paramount. You want to do well for yourself financially. You'd love to go to the Hall of Fame and be an all-star and be respected as one of the top players in the game. And you want to win a championship. Now, for every player, that order may be different, what you put tops and what would be second or what would be third. But I think pretty much every player would have that as their top three. If you're Arenado, you have that in Colorado, right? Why would you want to leave? And Colorado apparently didn't want him to, and they were able to work out an agreement. And that's good for the sport. It's good for Arenado, I think. It's good for the Colorado franchise. It's good for their fan base. Like I said, it's good for everyone unless you're a Yankee fan and you expected him to be wearing pinstripes in a year or two. And that's not going to happen now. So, again, I know you're devastated by that aspect of it, right? As a Red Sox fan, just devastated.
I am, except that two players that didn't resign or have outs in their contract are two of my Red Sox. So JD Martinez can opt out after this year, and Mookie Betts is a free agent after next year. And, let's be honest, Mookie Betts is going to get somewhere north of what a guy like Machado got. He's going to probably get somewhere between what Machado got and what Trout got. Let's be honest, right? We're going to be looking at like a 10-year, $330 million contract, maybe. I mean, he's the second best outfielder in baseball.
He's not going to come cheap.
No.
But then again, the Red Sox have the money. My comment to you as a Red Sox fan is you should expect your team to basically write the check because there's no excuse for them not to. And luxury taxes and all that aside, the Red Sox are making a ton of money.
Hold on. They're not making as much money as some of these other teams. Now, keep in mind, they have 20,000 less tickets to sell every game than the Yankees do, okay? It's different. They have a smaller market than the Yankees do. So their TV revenue, their local TV revenue is not the same as the Yankees. And, the Red Sox right now have the largest payroll in sports with Mookie Betts not making the huge amounts of money that he is potentially going to be making. So it's not like they don't spend. They have the highest payroll of any team right now in all of baseball. But it costs money. They've got 3 pitchers who are making, boku bucks. Actually 4, because they signed Eovaldi to that in big contract. I think they have 4 starting pitchers making more than $20 million a year. And then you've got, JD Martinez is not making chump change, but, he has opt-outs. He kind of got lowballed last year, right? And was waiting around forever. And I know what he was wanting to get and what he ended up getting. Who knows what the market's going to be like next year? Maybe the Yankees are going to be like, crap. All these guys are resigning. We don't really care. We're going to go out and overpay for one of these guys because what else are we going to do? But again, I will caution the Yankees that the last time that they took a free agent away from the Red Sox, that was a guy named Jacoby Ellsbury, and I don't think it worked out very well for them. So just beware. Just saying.
That didn't work out so well for them. I'll still maintain, despite all the contracts the Red Sox are paying, and maybe they're not the Yankees, people who own major league teams, by and large, and we've talked about this before too, there was a time, again, decades and decades and decades ago, when families owned them and when people who didn't have as much money owned them, when baseball wasn't the big money business. It's the reason why Bill Veeck ended up having to sell the White Sox and get out of baseball. It's the reason the Wrigleys ended up selling the Cubs. It's the reason why Connie Mack and the A's, Connie Mack was owner and manager for pretty much the entire franchise's existence until they ended up moving out of Philly and he was gone. There was a time when you had people who owned these teams who didn't have a lot of money. Now they're owned by people where these teams, if you own a sports franchise, it's kind of your hobby. It's not where you make your money. Charles Comiskey, when he owned the White Sox way back when, owned the White Sox and operated them like a business. That was his business. He had to turn a profit with it, or else, if he loses money, then he's really losing money. People that own major league teams today, though, like I said, they're hobbies. If you lose money doing that, who cares? You're multi-millionaire, billionaire type guys where you lose 10, 15 million, you'll find a way to write it off, or you'll find a way to make that up someplace else. My feeling is that if you want to win, just pay the people you need to win. And again, there is some limit to that, but I would feel confident if I were you that the Red Sox will work out something with Betts because he's just too good of a player for them to lose. I don't think that they're going to want to watch him walk away. They may have to get a little bit creative with how they work some of their salary someplace else, but I would expect he's not going to sign an extension. I think that's been pretty much made clear, but I do think he's going to end up back with the Red Sox. And that'll be another prediction I'll probably be wrong with. But, I'll make that one early that he'll end up working out a deal with them at some point. Because, again, it's not like he's with Kansas City, which certainly couldn't afford to necessarily pay him what he would be getting on an open market. But we'll see. I mean, that's a lot of people gone that won't be going to free agency. It's going to make some of these upcoming free agent classes that much thinner. Baseball has definitely changed. There was a time you could build a team through free agency, and it's shifted now to where you build it around young talent and through your draft and through your minor league system. Definitely a shift over the last, maybe decade, I would say, that we've seen this. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely changing the financial landscape and the way teams are constructed to different than, almost kind of back to the way it used to be, because that's the way it was before free agency, right? You built your team by building it through your farm system and through the guys you developed. And it's kind of funny that we've kind of come a little bit full circle, just with a lot more zeros at the end of those contracts, right?
Right. And keep in mind, back in the day, guys didn't get multi-year contracts. They basically would have 1-year contracts year to year, but they would have no ability to go anywhere else. So it was a unilateral situation. I always remember one of my favorite stories was that Ralph Kiner back in the 50s was the home run champion one year. And he went to his general manager at the end of the year. You always meet with your general manager at the end of the year, and you would discuss your contract for the next year. And he went to the general manager and said, I believe I should get a raise. I led the league in home runs. And the general manager or the owner or whoever it was who was in charge of contracts at the time basically said, we finished in last place with you. We could finish in last place without you. You're going to get the same amount of money you got last year. Here's your contract. Sign it. And that was it. There was no negotiation. You didn't need an agent. You had no rights. That's kind of why free agency happened. It was basically, if you wanted to play baseball, your rights were owned by that team. And a lot of these guys, even the stars, couldn't make ends meet just on their baseball salary. They would actually have to take a job in the off season. Think about the craziness of that.
Things have changed. Yep.
Roger Maris had to work for the Anheuser-Busch company in the off season to make extra money, and actually parlayed that into a beer distributorship, which actually made him far more money in retirement than he ever made playing baseball. Things are for the better. I think that they went a little overboard in the past, and maybe they're correcting themselves. So, but we'll see. I'm sure something else we'll talk more about as the season goes along. I want to sneak in one last thing here. Welcome to the first episode of Name That Manager. Randy, are you ready? I'm going to give you a name of a team, and you're going to have to give me the name of the manager. And I'm betting that you won't get 50% of the 10 managers that I give you.
And wait, you're going to give me the manager's name and I give you the team? Or are you going to give me the team and I have to give you the manager?
Yep.
Oh, God. I'm not going to get any of these right. They're all idiots. To me, they're all like, it's like when you see down in the French Quarter, people wearing T-shirts that say drunk 1 and drunk 2. They all should be wearing shirts that say idiot 1, idiot 2. I'm not going to know these guys. All right, let's do this. Let's make me look bad. Go ahead. I barely know the manager of my team.
Who is the manager of your team?
Rick Renteria is the White Sox manager.
Oh, hey, you got one.
Is that one of the ones on the list?
It is, but I was going to give you a gimme.
All right. Well, let's go on further.
Can you please name the manager for me of the Texas Rangers?
Well, I know it's not Ron Washington anymore. I haven't had that horse to kick around for years. Is it Walker? As in Walker, Texas Ranger? Is that the manager?
It is not.
I have no idea. It's not the same manager as it was last year, though, because they fired that guy, didn't they? They did. It's a brand new manager. I have no idea who it is. I'm not following the Rangers because their rebuilding plan is to keep veterans on their team and continuously give at-bats to guys they shouldn't. So I don't follow the Rangers anymore. They're a dumpster fire. I'm going to take the hit there. Who's the manager?
Chris Woodward is the manager.
Is his partner Bernstein? Okay.
Exactly. My point.
I guess. Okay.
Next, name the manager of the Cincinnati Reds.
This one I know because I literally just looked it up when I was talking to a friend of mine and we were trying to figure out the bullpen usage and what the manager was doing. And there was a game, I think it was on opening day, where the manager was playing lefty-righty matchups. And he went to bring in somebody and he needed a lefty and he had one warming up in the pen, but not soon enough to actually face the lefty, if my memory is correct. I believe his name is Bell. I can't remember his first name, though. I remember Bell because I kept thinking, is it like Buddy Bell's kid or related to the Bells?
It is.
Am I right? Is it Bell? What's his first name?
David Bell.
David Bell. Okay. And I only know this because, again, I was watching him mismanage something during like a game on opening day. So that's the only reason I even knew that much. Oh, God, this is dicey. I'm 2 for 3, though, if you count the White Sox manager. So I'm doing okay.
Trust me, I'm holding some back here. You won't get the ones I'm going to hold back.
Oh, God. These are the gimmies. Oh, geez. Okay.
Name the manager of the Baltimore Orioles.
It's not Earl Weaver. And I don't know who it is, but it's someone who's not smart enough to stop playing Chris Davis. We mentioned today that I made a feces monkey-related comment on Twitter earlier about the Yankees. This manager may fit the description as well. He keeps playing Chris Davis, who hasn't had a hit since September of 14th of last year, I believe it is, right?
That's correct.
Stop putting this guy's name in the lineup. He's washed. He's done. What are you doing? I don't even know who it is, but already I know that an 11-year-old playing MLB The Show, which just dropped a little while ago, would know better to not be running Chris Davis out there every day. Who's the manager? Because I'm going to give up. I have no clue.
Brandon Hyde.
Who?
Exactly.
Wait, who?
I agree. Exactly. I've never heard of him.
Is Dr. Jekyll his bench coach? Who the hell is that guy? Who the hell is that?
No idea.
What's his qualifications to run a major league team? Next. God. Oh, anyone can manage a team. Did he win something like a prize? Did he show up at the game? Was he like manager for the day? What?
He's been a manager for years, and he was Rick Renteria's bench coach.
Oh, okay. Let's move on. Next.
Okay. Who is the manager of the St. Louis Cardinals?
It's not Mike Matheny anymore. And that's all I know. You know what? Not Mike Matheny. I have no clue. Who's the Cardinals manager? I'm just immediately forfeiting that. Okay. Mike Schilt. Okay. Sounds like someone who should be teaching a science class in high school. I have no clue who that is. Okay. And I'm actually watched Cardinal games this year, and I didn't know who that was.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. You're not naming some of my favorite whipping boys. So, I see you're dodging some of those teams, but continue.
Who is the manager of the San Diego Padres?
I own multiple Padre pitchers in our fantasy league, and I can't tell you. I have no idea. God, no clue. No idea. I give up. Just tell me the name, and I'll make a snarky comment, and we'll move on.
The manager of the San Diego Padres is Andy Green.
Again, who? Is this his first job in the majors?
I believe it is, yeah.
Is he related to Seth Green? Is Dr. Evil his dad?
I would hope he's related to Sean Green.
I'm starting to think you're just making some of these names up, because I really have not heard of half of these. Well, no, I haven't heard of any of these guys other than the one guy I hadn't heard of before I heard of him on Thursday.
Here's the thing about him. I didn't know who he was. I thought he was brand new.
Okay.
He's been the manager since 2016.
Well, to be fair, I haven't watched a Padres game since 2016, unless I had someone on my fantasy team playing for the other team that wasn't the Padres, at which point I didn't really care what the Padres were doing, as long as it was benefiting my player. So, well then, welcome to the majors, Andy Green, 3 years later, or whatever. Next.
Okay. Who is the manager of the Atlanta Braves?
Okay, that I know. And I'll tell you why I know. It's he's got I'm trying to remember his first names. It's Brian Snitker. Is that how you say his name?
Yep.
And I know this because I owned Vizcaíno last year in our fantasy league. And I just remember Snitker did everything from day one to try to remove Vizcaíno from the closer's role until eventually Vizcaíno got hurt and removed himself. And he just seemed to have a hard-on to not have Vizcaíno as closer. So I remembered seeing that name in Roto World updates all season long as he kept talking about how he wanted to use other guys in the ninth, even as Vizcaíno continuously pitched well, and it didn't seem to matter. So he was one of those guys that went right onto my shit list as managers that, you know what, I don't really like you, and I'm going to complain about you. I know him because I don't like him. There you go, right off the bat. Next, find someone else I can't stand, and I'll probably know for some reason, and I'll know who it is. See, some of these other guys, they haven't done anything to offend me yet, so I don't know who they are.
All right, 3 more.
Okay.
Who is the manager for the Seattle Mariners?
I have no idea. No idea. Is it someone I've at least heard of?
Yes. And again, he's been the manager since 2016. He replaced Lloyd McClendon. I've forgotten that Lloyd McClendon was the Seattle manager.
I just remember Lloyd McClendon ineptly managing Pittsburgh. I didn't know he ineptly managed more than one team.
He did. I
own Nelson Cruz, who was with Seattle last year, so I clearly watched Seattle games. But I didn't own Seattle pitchers, so I didn't get a chance to see pitching changes, which is why I probably don't know who it is. Who's our Seattle manager?
Scott Service.
Ah, okay. That's a familiar name. I remember him from his playing days. So I have no personal opinions towards Scott Service. I have nothing good nor bad to say about him. And Seattle's actually gotten off to a pretty good start this year, despite the idea that they're rebuilding. So props to him, at least in the first week. You got 2 more?
I got 2 more.
All right.
Who is the manager of the Arizona Diamondbacks?
Okay, that one I know. Again, I know it because I don't understand the thought process. It's Torey Lovullo, however I'm pronouncing his name right or wrong. And I know this because a certain member in my household rostered Archie Bradley for some money at our fantasy draft, presuming he would be the closer because Lovullo had said there was going to be competition in the spring, right, to be the closer in Arizona. And Archie Bradley pitched, I think, pretty well, and Greg Holland went out and looked absolutely washed up and posted like a 12-something spring ERA, and Lovullo gave him the closer's job, making my wife very unhappy, and me just laughing about how, again, why did you say there was a competition if there wasn't really one? Why didn't you just come out and say, we're going to make Greg Holland the closer because he's been the closer before, and I want to keep Bradley here? Why all that bullshit about, well, we're going to have a competition when obviously there was never going to be one? I know him because of some stupidity. That's how I know these guys. I don't know them for what they're doing good. I know for what they're doing that's stupid or idiotic or that doesn't make any sense. So there you go. That's how I know it, because I think he's probably an idiot. You got one more idiot for me, or you got someone who's not offended me? We'll find out shortly.
One more for you.
Okay.
Who is the manager of the Toronto Blue Jays?
That I have absolutely no idea. I have no clue. No clue.
So the guy was the manager of the Durham Bulls for 8 years. That was his previous head coaching experience.
Okay.
And he was just hired this year.
Okay.
He was bench coach for Tampa Bay.
So he's got some experience.
He does have some experience, but no head coaching experience at the major league level. Your manager in Toronto is none other than Charlie Montoyo.
Wasn't that like the lead character's name in Scarface? No, that was Tony Montana. Never mind. I'm sorry. I'm getting them confused. Did he tell everybody to say hello to his little friend? I've never heard of the guy before.
I thought it was the guy from The Princess Bride.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
There you That's an even better reference. Yes. I've never heard of him. I would never have guessed that.
Neither would I. I'll be honest. So that's your 10. You got 4 out of 10 right.
I only got my team and 3 guys that have pissed me off, basically. Or no, 2 that have pissed me off, or someone I know that they've pissed off, and 1 that I just was laughing at, like, how do you not get your lefty up when you have a lefty coming up when you're playing matchups? How do you not have him warm already? That's basically how I knew the other 3 that weren't my home team. And it wasn't for good reasons.
Yep.
What does that say?
That says that there's a lot of... This will go more into our discussion that we'll have at some later time about this changing breed of managers where it's really not about how good of a manager they are. It's how good they listen to direction from their superiors. So, and I think the fact that we're seeing so many of these guys that we've never heard before that don't have a track record as a manager in the major leagues is kind of, that's what they're looking for. They don't want somebody to say, yeah, but I know better. I've done this before. I've been successful. None of these guys a lot of these guys can't say that. They have no level of success at the major league level that they can point back to say that I have the chops to make these calls. So I think that's what it comes down to. I think it comes down to economics. They don't want to pay money for managers making dumb decisions. You know what? I can make the dumb decisions and not pay a manager.
There you go. They can make the dumb decision.
I think that's what it is.
And then blame the manager when it doesn't work. It's a perfect system.
It's perfect for them. Exactly.
Oh my God.
So that's all I got for that. So why don't you take us out?
On that note of me not knowing major league managers, we will be back later on. We'll have some more to talk about the year 1989 eventually. We also will be talking about the upcoming movies coming in the middle part of the year, as we're already in April and this year is going by pretty quickly. So we'll have that and a lot more to talk about. More baseball, I'm sure, more of my ignorance for sure, and other things. Until then, please check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com for all the links to your favorite places to listen to us. And until then, I'm Randy. That's been Steven. And thank you again for listening. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast. Check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms and follow us on Twitter at excruciatingpod. See you at the next episode.